Well, on Friday, we wanted to bring you Trump Live and missed the last day of our financial segment. But after this budget debacle we just saw this weekend, I think it needs to be done now more than ever. I still think there are many Republicans that don't understand the seriousness of our national finance problem. The Democrats definitely don't get it. But so much so that we just talked about it. Democrat Jamal Bowman was willing to pull the fire alarm to stop a vote on it. So let's talk about what actually needs to be done. Let's talk about the history and what works and what doesn't. And I'm talking actual solutions, not just some talking points or some election propaganda. Let's slash some government spending. Now, the root cause of almost all of our economic woes today can be directly tied to the government spending too much money. You want to set the economy on a long-term path for prosperity? We got to get serious about cutting spending. Nothing else matters until we do this. There's no taxing your way out of this hole. Every single time taxes have been raised, economic growth has slowed. And every time taxes have been lowered or cut, economic growth has been accelerated. It's that simple. It's binary. You want the greatest stimulus package ever? Suspend the federal income tax. Maybe a year or something like that. As always, we have the receipts, folks. We're going to take a walk back in time, a long walk back to the Wilson administration in 1913. Now, the 16th Amendment authorized Congress to collect revenue from taxpayers nationwide. Welcome to the birth of the modern federal income tax, where individuals back then would pay only 1% of any income they earned over $3,000. Now, according to an online inflation calculator, that same $3,000 is the equivalent to about $93,000 today. We have attributed, 3,000% inflation since then. You pay way more than that now. But he was just the first. Now, coming out of World War II, America had to make this economic shift. So President Harry Truman, using Woodrow Wilson's rubber stamp on the federal income tax, raised the minimum income tax to 20% with the top rate at over 90%. And what happened? Economic chaos. According to Forbes, average rent went up in some cities by 1,000%, weekly pay for manufacturing workers dropped, and the value of the dollar would fall, and taxes became more burdensome. This is not an isolated incident, folks. The economy stalled under Jimmy Carter's tax increases, too. In fact, today's inflation levels often draw comparisons to the last time it got this bad under Jimmy Carter, who oversaw a dwindling economy. It was crippled by inflation, and he signed off on not only raising taxes, but raising interest rates, too, beyond the 10%. I think it hit like 18% at one point. And this is well into uncharted territory. Now, the move directly burdened investments and clobbered economic growth. Businesses cut back, and millions of Americans lost their jobs. But in every instance, big government imposition hurt Americans. Every time they took the boot off the economy's neck, though, it helped. Case in point, no president was ever more committed to cutting taxes than Ronald Reagan. Now, the Economic Recovery Act in 1981 lowered the top tax rate from Jimmy Carter's 70%, which it had come down to 50%. 5 years later, in '86, Reagan signed the Tax Reform Act, which again lowered it to 28%. What happened? An economic explosion, one of the most notable ever. The inflation rate dropped from 13% in 1980 to 4.1% just 8 years later. Unemployment fell from 7.6% to 5.5%. The net worth of families earning between $20,000 and $50,000 and annually, obviously, grew by 27%. Real gross national product rose by 26%. Real GDP grew over 1/3 during Reagan's presidency. That's more than a $2 trillion increase. The average growth rate of GDP was 3.6 under Reagan's 8 years. Look, the numbers don't lie, folks, which applies to Donald Trump's economy as well. After the Trump tax cuts, median household incomes rose to their highest level ever in 2019, while poverty rate hit an all-time low, especially among minorities. Under the Trump administration, more Americans were employed than ever before, 160 million, and the unemployment rate fell to a 50-year low. The math is simple. When there are tax cuts, the economy grows. Even though there is lower tax rate, there is more money to tax. I guess if I were to oversimplify it, I guess the government, it goes like this. The government can take 50% of 100, or it can take 30% of 1,000. That's how tax cuts work. So with that settled, the only thing that's left to cut is the budget. So I tell you what, we got a couple minutes left. Let's balance it. Think about this. In 2022, the federal government took in $4.9 trillion. It spent $6.3 trillion with a $1.4 trillion deficit. So we need to cut. Let's start chopping. Great place to start, and I love this. The U.S. taxpayer doled out nearly $300 billion in foreign aid last year. For what? A lot of it went directly to countries that hate us, including establishments like the UN. But good news, folks. In Carl Higbie's world, these folks can now hate us for free. That's a $300 billion cut right there. Now, as we talked about earlier, remember that first federal income tax? The first 1040 tax form was 4 pages, and the size of the IRS was roughly 1/10 the size it is now, adjusted for population. Bring it back and shrink the IRS to the same size, respectively. Saves you a cool $13 billion in personnel. How about selling some property? The federal government tosses $1.5 billion a year into heating, keeping lit, and air conditioning over 77,000 vacant buildings. While they lecture us on the damage that cow farts do to the environment, by the way. How about terminating the $5 billion we pay out in leases and sell the estimated $50 billion in other unused property the federal government owns? Take the low end, since the government is horrible at negotiating anything, call that a cool $40 billion right there. But those are the easy ones. Let's get to some real meat and potato cuts. The Pentagon, folks, has never passed an audit ever. They're currently getting almost $1 trillion a year in funding. Over the last 5 years, the Pentagon can't account for over $2 trillion worth of assets. I say, slash it. Cut their budget in half. Folks, I was in the military. It will function just fine on that budget. Every year when I was a SEAL, they would send us on lavish trips to places like Lake Tahoe for cold weather training, just to make sure we burn up our budget so we'd get the same amount next year. Slash that in half. Cut $400 billion off the Pentagon budget until they can pass an audit. Our national security will be just fine, trust me. Maybe less civilian contractors. Look, we spend more than the next 10 nations combined on defense. I would say also, for good measure, once they do pass the audit, make them justify every penny going forward. Give them a zero budget every year. Make them ask for it. Also, check this one out. Social Security consumed $1.2 trillion in 2022. Now, considering that people live a decade longer than they did when it was introduced, it's time to raise the minimum age to 70. Average life expectancy in America is now 77, with people starting to collect at 62 and a half. Raising the minimum age to 70 will cut the burden in half, making it only cost $600 billion right there. Another $600 billion towards our cuts. The Department of Education, little more than an agenda-driven piggy bank that influences what should be entirely driven by the local communities, more than $270 billion. You're gone. Now, with the shutdown narrowly averted, an estimated 4.5 million people would have gone without paychecks. Okay, sorry to hear that. But one of the things I found interesting was that 820,000 of those people would have been sent home because they are deemed non-essential. Now, only the government would employ non-essential people. I say, get rid of them. They're not essential, right? Average salary, $75,000 a year. That's $61.5 billion we cut. Put that on the tally. Folks, in just 3 minutes, we were able to identify almost $1.7 trillion in simple cuts. Top that off with, I don't know, call it a mandatory 10% reduction in force from the bloated government across the board. You got yourself likely a $500 billion surplus next year. Look, I don't even have a college degree and I figured this out. But I have run a business, unlike most people on Capitol Hill. You see, it's not that the solutions aren't there. It's that the people we send to Washington lack the political will to execute them. And until we actually find that will, this problem is going to get a lot worse. Elections have consequences. Think about that when you vote in 2024.